Today we are jumping right back into our series that we have been doing on adversity. And I was talking to James, Brother James person, and he told me adversity university. And that just stuck with me. And I thought that was so true of the things that we go through in learning through adversity. And, we went through a lot of different things, the qualifications, the reasons for adversity. Pastor just preached a wonderful message on why do bad things happen in our lives. And, now we're talking about responses. And the first one we had talked about was just different things of how we can view things, our perspective. And that's really what it comes down to in response. We talked about our perspective in the first one. Today I want to talk about perspective a little bit more as we jump into responses to adversity and how do we react to adversity, because it happens so much in our life. I've said it multiple times that trouble is like dust. As soon as you get rid of it, it comes right back again. But if we change, just think about this. If we changed our perspective on the adversities that are in our life, because it's the majority of life, man is born of a few days, but full of trouble. If we would change, that's if you're a Christian or not a Christian. If you're just born of a woman, trouble is going to happen in your life, but we have a God that's with us. But if we changed our perspective on trouble and adversity in our lives, imagine how different our lives would be. And I'm working on this myself. I tend to, of course this happened, and everything just bad happens to me, and we get that complex about us and that perspective. And something I want you to realize is the way you respond to adversity is a symptom of where your focus is. If you're focused on the problem, you're focused on what's going wrong, that's where your focus is, your response is going to be dictated by where your focus is. But if your focus is on, oh man, God's good anyway, look at all the great things that I have, if your perspective is right, then your response will be right. But a lot of times we tend to have a perspective and look at things from one point of view, saying if something bad happened, then woe is me. Why is God doing this to me? I must have done something to deserve this. This must be consequences. And not all the time, is there one way that something is done, one perspective. There's always different views to it. In John chapter number 9, you had the man who was, I believe he was blind. Yeah, he was blind. And they said, who sinned, this man or his parents? They had a perspective from previous experience that because he was blind, he must have sinned or his parents sinned. But that was not at all the case. It was that Jesus Christ would be glorified. And so there's always a perspective. We look at things and then we respond to things based on our perspective, when in reality, it's not the right one. And we need to examine the other perspectives. I mean, Job, people looked at him and said, oh, you transgressed. What did you do wrong for this to come onto your life? But he didn't do anything at all. He was conveying God's goodness and to show Satan that, hey, God is good. I'm still serving God despite the challenges and despite the adversity that is coming in my life. And so we have a perspective when we look at things. When something bad happens to someone in life, we automatically assume they must have done something. And we have a perspective a lot of times in life that is not accurate. But if we would take a different point of view and put our focus in the right place and making positive assumptions, I think we would be in such a better place. I preached on the mind not too long ago here at our church and at another church in Colorado. And, when you look at different signs, like for instance, the Baskin-Robbins sign, some people see that more than others because some people just eat more dessert than others. And looking at the Baskin-Robbins sign, you're like, okay, it says Baskin-Robbins. But someone else pointed out to me a different perspective. They said, have you ever noticed that there's a 31 in between the Baskin-Robbins? And I don't know if you've ever noticed this before. There's a 31 for the 31 flavors of ice cream that they have. And I'm like, I never noticed that before. They said FedEx. Have you ever noticed that in between the FedEx and in the middle of the word, there's an arrow pointing? I'm like, I never noticed that. And now every time I see any of those things, like I just can't help but notice because another perspective was given to me. And that's all I want to share with you is that, don't take things for face value sometimes and add our opinions to the fact. Don't just look at adversity. Don't just look at trouble happening in our lives and automatically just take it as in, woe is me, I must have done something. And you automatically have an assumption instead of actually vetting it and saying, okay, where is my perspective? Where can I put my focus? I need to put my focus in glorifying God and that God has been good, and I need to put my perspective in the right place and allowing it to make me better, not bitter, and choosing what to do and how to act in the midst of that adversity. Because there's always something positive that you can find in the midst of your adversity. Let me prove it to you. So Corrie ten Boom was in a prison camp in Germany. And they were helping different people, and so they were imprisoned, and they were down there with a bunch of people in this prison camp, and there was this big flea problem. Now, obviously, I can't stand fleas. I can't stand bugs. We just bought a house recently, and there's cockroaches, or water bugs, whatever you want to call them, and there's just different bugs, and I can't stand bugs just walking around everywhere. But they had this problem with fleas, and Corrie ten Boom started to complain, like, man, I'm so tired of all these fleas and all these things, and her sister was like, hey, just calm down, like let's not complain, let's just be thankful. We're all together, and they were doing Bible studies, and they were growing in their faith, and they were just learning more of the Word. And come to find out, they didn't know this, because of the fleas, the very same thing that they were complaining about, which was a trouble to them in their life, was the very same thing that were keeping the soldiers from coming down there to where they were. So because of the fleas, the thing they thought was a trouble, an adversity, that very same thing was keeping the guards away so that they could do the Bible study and learn more about God and grow. If we would just take a different perspective, there's always a different perspective than what we automatically assume in our mind when adversity comes into our life. Instead of saying, why me? Why not say, how can I grow from this? How can I become stronger in this? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm a very impatient person. And so when I get in cars, people just drive stupid. I know we're in Texas, and the number one poll, and they did a study, the worst drivers is in Texas. They said it's like Louisiana is like number 2. And I see that. Trust me. I'm probably one of those people that are like, that's an idiot. You're an idiot. Stop driving like that. But, and so I tend to be impatient, but whenever I say something I shouldn't, or I react, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it better next time. Next time somebody does something dumb, I'm going to just stop myself, be slow to anger, and then react the right way, respond the right way. And then there's always a different perspective. When you see a car wreck, you were running late, and you're like, man, I'm always late. And then you see a car wreck, it's like, well, man, I might be late, but I didn't get involved in that. Thank God, and we tend to look at things in our life instead of saying, okay, what's the positive perspective? There's always a positive perspective from it. There's always perspective. We could say, man, it's so hot out here in this Texas sun. Well, why not have the perspective that, man, God's such a cool God that he changes the weather throughout the year, that I get to experience all these different kinds of weathers. I get to be in the heat, and there's so many benefits to that. I get to be in the cold. There's so many benefits to that. It kills all the mosquitoes. There's always a positive perspective at looking at everything that can come from that situation if we allow it to. But having the positive, and it's where our focus is. Wherever our focus is, that's what's going to be the result in how we respond and how we act in that situation. There was another cool story. There was a young couple. It was a pastor and his wife. They found out that, he found out that their child had been born with Down syndrome. And the pastor was just struggling this. The wife had not known yet. And so he went to go get counsel. And he went to talk to this other pastor. And he was struggling. He's like, I don't know how I'm going to tell my wife. And, this, that, and the other. And the pastor turned to Exodus chapter number 4. Exodus chapter number 4 and verse number 11. Exodus chapter number 4. Give me just 1 second. Let me read this to you. I had another passage pulled up. Exodus chapter number 4, verse number 11. The pastor read this to them. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb or deaf or the seeing or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? And then he turns over to Romans 8:28 and he says, All things work together for good to them that love God and to the called according to the purpose. And he said, the Lord is wanting to be glorified in this situation. The Lord has blessed you with a child with Down syndrome. And the pastor's like, I never looked at that before. So he went back. His wife was freaking out. She's like, they won't let me see my child. I don't know what's going on. And he said, babe, like, God has blessed us with a child with Down syndrome. And she had no idea, and she started bawling, and she's like, what are you talking about? He's like, God said it. It's in God's word. She's like, where? And so he reads them the same verse, or he reads her the same verses, and they both just start glorifying God together. Well, there was a lady, the operator at the hospital, and she was a very critical person, specifically when it came to Christians and Christianity. And they called in the operator and said, hey, we have been born or given birth to a child with Down syndrome, and we've been blessed for it, and we're going to glorify God in it. And that operator was blown away. She was always looking for ways to criticize Christians, to throw Christians down, but that blew her away that day, so much so that she went around the hospital telling everybody how they reacted to this supposed problem in their life. That pastor went back to church that next week, and that operator and 70 nurses went to church, and 30 of them got saved. That problem that was in their life that they could have complained about, that they could have had the wrong perspective on, they said, God has blessed us, and we're going to use this as a blessing and look at it in a positive way and respond the right way. There's different things, and it led to people getting saved. There's things in our life that, we've lost a baby, and, there's different things that's happened in our life, but I know that we're going to allow this to make us better and not bitter. We're going to respond the right way because there's a positive to every single adversity that comes into our life. There's always a right perspective. I know there was a king one time who there was a path, and he had laid a big boulder in the middle of the path, or a big rock. And what the king had put under it, he had put in some money, and he put in a letter from him, and he put it under the rock. And all these people just kept walking around the rock, just trying to get around it, just kept going, that obstacle that was in their path. And the people just over and over and over kept walking past it, ignoring it. And that one man just said, hey, I'm going to move that obstacle. I'm going to move the rock out of the way. And I'm going to, I'm just going to get it out of the way. And so he started working on it by himself, and he got it out of the way. And under it, he found that money and a letter from the king that said that this reward goes to the person willing to move the obstacle. And I think that there's always something great on the other side of an adversity, on the other side of an obstacle that could be achieved in our lives. And, I think that all these, there's always just another perspective to have to it. And your adversity, as you face them today, you're going to face something. After you listen to this, you're going to face something. And how you respond and the perspective you choose to have is all up to you. You can have a flat tire and say, man, this stupid car. Or you can say, oh, flat tire, this gives me a chance to learn how to put on tires better, because you never know when someone else might need help. This gives me a chance to slow down my day and do some work, and that someone might stop to try to help me, and I could give a track to them. There's always a positive perspective. Michael Jordan once said, he said, I've never lost a game. He said, I've just ran out of time. There's always a positive perspective to the adversity that's in our life. Philippians chapter number 1, this is the last thing I'm going to say. Philippians chapter number 1, Paul is being beaten. And some guys are preaching. It says some preach Christ because they want to see people, they're becoming waxing confident by my bonds. But there's some people preaching Christ of envy and strife and adding affliction to his bonds. They're adding, like, Paul is being beaten more and more because these people are sharing the gospel, and that's why they're sharing the gospel. But you know what Paul says? He doesn't say, I'm being beaten. This is frustrating. God, why would you allow this? I just served you. He said, whether in affliction or whether in the positive parts, if the gospel is being preached, that's all that matters. And Paul's being beaten, but says, as long as the gospel's getting out, I don't care how it gets out. If we would choose to have the right perspective and the right focus, I think our whole lives would be different. Thank you so much for joining me today again, and I hope you have a wonderful week. I don't know what day this is, probably a Monday that you're listening to this, or a Tuesday. Hope you have a wonderful week. Please try to be a witness, have the right mindset, and let's respond right to the adversity as we continue this study and Adversity University and how to handle adversity.